So profile of a cop is somebody who has grown up in crisis, does well in crisis, doesn't know how to live without crisis, issues with a father figure or significant loss early in life, history of abuse, emotional, physical, sexual, or neglect.
This is gonna hurt. It's time for the Suffering Podcast.
Her boyfriend was in a gang, and he wanted to get out. Oh, was I lily white and truly naive? And I'm like, well, we can make that happen.
Yeah.
So I had no idea about like jumping in, about OGs,
Getting
about
beat in
any of that crap. So I ended up riding with down in Carson and Compton, which are two of the more difficult areas. And I'll never forget, I hadn't been in the back of a car, but I did learn a really cool word. So when I was signing, my waiver, and I was releasing everything, including my stirpies, and I'm like, what's a stirpie? And they're like, anybody else. I'm like, oh, that's cool. So that became like a legal word that I've like maintained my entire life is the word stirpie. And so I had done everything I needed to. I'm now in the car, and as I'm driving off, which nobody loved, again, having a ride along, but I'm in the back seat because they ride two-person units. So I'm in the back seat, and the guy goes, just so you know, the only thing gangs hate more than each other is police. So if there is a problem and we're caught in crossfire, we're not going to worry about getting you out because we have to take care of the situation. And they're like, and we need to tell you that the back doors don't open. I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, well, what do you mean back doors open? Exactly. So I'm now sitting in the back. I've now signed off on everything. Not that I was worth a dime, but I've learned the word stirpie, which is cool. And I'm like thinking to myself, oh my God. And did this like amazing ride along with them. And it was like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride.
The amount of guts that you had to show and the fortitude to step into that willingly, into that dangerous situation. Dangerous situation number one, you sat in the backseat of a police car. Do you understand what goes on in the backseat of a police car?
I do now. I didn't then. I didn't know the word stirpie then.
Every bodily fluid comes out in the backseat.
I got it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Bad.
I got it.
Just getting back to that, did you get any like negative feedback from other cops? It was like, oh, we don't want this girl with us.
No, but you can tell that they certainly weren't embracing me being there. So, as time went on, it was interesting because I wasn't a one-and-doneer. And then I went on because now I thought I wanted to become a cop. I wanted to go through LAPD. So I ended up riding with the same sergeant over and over and over. And that became a really cool experience because there was a situation that arose. I told the story in the past. And so we knew that the gang detail unit was always plain clothes, and the sergeant wasn't. Except, so there's a situation. He said, that it is not for us to get out of the vehicles. That that the gang unit will come. Blah blah blah. Well, there's a situation where we couldn't get the gang unit there, and he gets out of the car, and of course I've already signed my life away, and he is running. So in California they have cinder block walls. So we get to the cinder block wall. I'm running. Like, what the fuck am I going to do? So anyway, I'm running, and he looks at me, and the eyes are the soul. And it was the most bizarre experience because this is a man that there is nothing between the two of us. Absolutely platonic, nothing there. And his eyes are saying it all. And for the first time, I can see fear. And I can see him telling me that he loved me. And I don't mean in that weird way. Yeah. I just mean as a human being that was there. And when he spoke, he said, they know what's over that wall. I don't. And I'm paid to jump it. And that changed my life.
Yeah.
Because I thought to myself at that point, did I want to jump the wall? And could I? Not physically. All of this was emotional. I was getting my first master's at the time in clinical psych. And I thought to myself, holy crap, and I always forget to tell the other side. He did fine. Everything turned out. But it was really more about me. It was more about this change that happened to me. And then I ended up getting engaged, moved back east, and ended up working on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in Alphabet City on 6th and D. There were more deaths on 6th and D than they were any place else. And now I was running GED programs or what have you. And it was really interesting because I was working the other side of it. I was now working truly with America's most wanted youth. Everyone had to have they had to be involved in the criminal justice system because that's who we're funded by. So it was really interesting dealing with repeat offenders, most of them drugs, and now being able to truly see that the difference between a cop and a convict was that at some point in time, somebody took a right-hand turn and somebody took a left-hand turn.
Fork in the road.
And if not but for the grace of God, so go I.
Yeah.
And so it was really understanding that this was an interesting path. And even when I was out in California and I started looking at gang members, and I thought to myself, it was back then they were starting to give women the weapons because women were in search as much as men were and the power of that. And I thought to myself, my God, to have somebody that would love me enough to kill for me. I know, like bizarre.
It sounds like a romance novel.
But as you're sitting there and you're trying to understand how this stuff happens, and yet it was this brotherhood, it was this family that they had created.
The gang members, yes.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
And when I really started to kind of embrace law enforcement and realize I was going to be probably a more advantageous side for me, that I really started looking at your unions and other things as these, healthier gangs, but that you guys will, God willing, kill for each other, will take care of each other.
We always say law enforcement is one of the biggest gangs in the world.
So, yes. So it was interesting. So I really didn't veer off. It was just really understanding kind of a person. And interestingly enough, out in California, I had never met a gang member that didn't want to be a cop. No,
Well, they have a lot in common.
They do.
So we know some reform gangsters.
Gangbangers.
Yeah, well, not gangbangers.
Yeah, gangsters.
We know some
Gangbangers.
reform gangsters. And once you retire from the battlefield, we actually have a lot in common.
Yeah.
And we get along. Just, hey, we're retired. We did what we had to do, and you did what you had to do. Some days you won, some days we won.
Right. Some days you get the bear, some days the bear gets you.
Yeah.
But here's the profile.
I say it a different way, but I say sometimes you're the toilet paper, other times you're the shit.
So here's the profile of a cop, but I think it's also going to go for the other one. So profile of a cop is somebody who has grown up in crisis, does well in crisis, doesn't know how to live without crisis, issues with a father figure or significant loss early in life, history of abuse, emotional, physical, sexual, or neglect. Makes for a great cop, makes for a difficult home life.
It's true.
Rang the bell.
She's so right.
So
She rang the bell.
Check.
So in my practice, and I go over this the first session, and I cannot tell you how many of my officers in the first 3 sessions disclosed that they had been sexually molested as kids.
It's becoming more and more of a thing now, isn't
So,
it?
well, this
Childhood
goes back
trauma.
like 35. This goes back 35 years ago when I started the practice. So it's been really interesting. So I've done a lot of work with John Violante, and so I dealt with this with John years and years ago. And I'm like, statistically speaking, I'm telling you that the general population is 1 out of 3 females are molested, 1 out of 7 males. I'm telling you, my practice is 50% of that. And when you and this is part of what needs to be looked at.
It's so scary because you had said that to me on the phone.
Right.
All those things that you just reeled off there. And I honestly had the feeling like you punched me in the stomach. It was
From your eyes, it looked like I punched you again just now.
You kind of did.
Exactly.
It was
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
a gut shot of truth.
Yeah.
And it hurt so bad to hear that. But after I heard it, I thought about it for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I would talk about it, and I'm like, you're not going to believe this. Like, you're really not going to believe this. And without telling people my own history, because there's parts of my history that are very hidden. Mike knows some, but he doesn't know all. And it's me coming to terms with my path in life. And that's what you're doing. You're opening eyes to, okay, well, it's good that you became a cop because this is why you became a cop, and it's okay. And there's a lot of others out there because
Right.
when Mike and I were involved in a shooting and we're going through all sorts of different problems with that uncontrollable chaos, we thought we're all alone. We thought there's nobody else like us. And now what you said is, if you go back even further in my past,
Right.
where I thought I'm shutting this down. I'm never telling anybody this. They're going to think all sorts of bad stuff about me. Well, no, the truth is there's more of me than there aren't.
Oh, absolutely.
Without doubt.
Absolutely.
And most of those people are probably swallowing their feelings because
Yeah.
they don't want to
Or-
come out. They don't want to come out and say it.
Or a gun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I mean, and to be able to, I almost don't want to say the word normalize because I don't think it's necessarily normalizing, but to be able to normalize trauma, where this is something that is far more common when we look at the numbers, and when I talk about pedophiles, and for every, because when I train, this is all stuff that I talk about. So when you deal with a child molester, when you deal with a male that has molested outside of the home, that he has an average of 358 different victims responsible for over 42,000 counts against those 358 victims. And so when I talk about that, and for me, I'm not big on numbers without facts. I find that people have sensationalized numbers.
You can manipulate
You can
statistics.
manipulate any
As
number
a-
you want.
As a
Right.
traffic investigator, I used to do it all the time.
And I listen to people, and that kind of pisses me off. So there was two researchers. One was the last name of Fuller. The other one was Abel. I think Fuller did the first research on it. And what they got, I want to say it was in Minnesota, is that they were able to convince the attorney general to waive prosecution because they could not get numbers. So they needed to figure out what they were looking at. And in order to do it, they said to the attorney general, we need for you to waive prosecution, that if people come forward, that for every single victim that they had, that you would waive prosecution. Now, the caveat is, if they didn't account for the person and another person came forward, that was no dice. And that's how we got those numbers. And then Abel repeated it, and it was the same. Years later, I ended up dealing with the head polygrapher. He was retired for the FBI. He was doing a chemical castration study up in Buffalo, and he ended up staying at the house beforehand. And I said, listen, I think these numbers are a little sensationalized. This is what's going on. What are you seeing? He said, those numbers are accurate until it comes to priests. He said priests are up over 1,000.
So one of the this is harsh. So one of the priests I went to Catholic high school. One of the priests in my high school, who I knew very well, he got caught doing the unthinkable.
Diddling.
Doing the unthinkable. So my high school friend calls me, and this is I'm a cop. I got some wicked humor, like it's bad, and I go, hey, did he ever touch you? And he goes, no. And he goes, did he ever touch you? And I said, no. What, am I not attractive? He never laid a hand on me. But that was my way of bringing light to a really serious situation. And we know this. Like, we know that this stuff happens because they're protected, and a priest can't do anything wrong. And I'm not shitting on the Catholic Church because there's some good people there. And I know most of my friends are Catholics. And but yeah, there's some bad stuff in there.
One of my patients had disclosed to me that he had been molested. It was a priest. And in my world, you have, X amount, you have like 72 hours or whatever, because there is no statute of limitations for the report if the person still has access to children. So I'll never forget. It was the most unbelievable, fucked up first session that I've ever had. So he discloses it to me. And I said, did you ever, because he'd been a marriage counselor. I'm like, did this ever come up with a marriage counselor? He's like, yes. And I said, did she ever report it? No. Why the hell didn't she report it? Like, this is the other problem. The other problem is my lane of therapists that really need to understand what the laws are and to be able to do the right thing. So he had a 2-year-old son at the time. And before the end of the session, I said, have you ever touched your son or ever had any thoughts of touching him? And he looked me in the eye and said, absolutely not. So he left. We set up a session for the following week. And when he came in, I said to him, I'm going to tell you, I would have lost the form I never thought you were coming back. He goes, I'll be honest with you. I didn't either. He said, but I'll tell you why I did. He said, because I knew that if you believed that I had ever touched my son, that you would do the right thing and you would report me. And anybody that's willing to do the right thing, I can work with.